"Get out of my kitchen. You were never part of this family." My son-in-law said it quietly, like he was correcting a child who had wandered into the wrong room. He didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. He must have forgotten whose name was on the deed to that kitchen, to that house, to every inch of land it sat on. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I set my coffee cup down on the counter, very slowly, and I smiled. Not a warm smile, the kind of smile that meant I already knew something he didn't. If you've ever been made to feel like a guest in your own home, brothers and sisters, then this story is for you. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours. Now let me tell you how a 67-year-old retired civil engineer from Knoxville, Tennessee became a ghost in his own house and how he made sure every single person who tried to erase him lived to regret it. My name is Robert Calloway. I spent 38 years designing bridges and highway overpasses for the state of Tennessee. I understood load-bearing capacity. I understood stress fractures. I understood exactly what happens when you push a structure past its limits without reinforcing the foundation first. What I did not understand, what I was completely blind to, was that the same principles I applied to concrete and steel could have told me everything I needed to know about the people sitting at my dinner table. My wife Carol passed away on a Tuesday morning in late February, 14 months before any of this began, pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 9 weeks. The cruelest part was not the speed of it. The cruelest part was that she spent the last 3 of those weeks planning for me. She worried about me being alone in our house on the lake. She made me promise I would call our daughter, Sandra, every Sunday. She told me where she kept the insurance papers. She made me write down her apple cake recipe by hand because she didn't trust the printer. I still have that piece of paper. I will always have that piece of paper. After Carol was gone, the house on Lake Holston felt like a structure with its load-bearing wall removed. We had built that property together over 22 years, 3 acres on the eastern bank. A wraparound porch Carol had designed herself, down to the width of the boards. A workshop where I kept my drafting tools. A garden she had planted, replanted, and loved like a third child. The property was paid off completely. I owned it outright, free of any obligation to any bank or institution on earth. It was the single most valuable thing I had ever built, and Carol and I had built it together. Sandra called every Sunday, just like I had promised Carol she would. For the first 4 months, the calls were good. She would check in, ask about the garden, ask if I was eating. Then one Sunday in June, the call felt different. Her voice had that careful quality people use when they've rehearsed what they're going to say. "Dad, Marcus and I have been talking." Marcus Webb was her husband. They had been married for 6 years. He ran what he described as a commercial real estate consulting firm out of Nashville, though in all those years I had never quite understood what the company actually produced. "We've been really worried about you out there alone. That house is a lot to manage for one person. What if something happened to you and nobody knew for days?" I told her I was fine. I told her I walked 2 miles every morning. She kept talking. "Marcus's lease on his office space downtown is ending in August. We thought, if you were open to it, we could come stay with you for a while. Keep you company. Help with the upkeep. Marcus could use the workshop space for his business records. We wouldn't be in your way." Everything about the offer sounded reasonable. Sandra was my only child. She was the living proof that Carol and I had done something right. And I will be honest with you, brothers and sisters, I was lonely in a way I had no language for. The silence in that house at 6 in the morning was a physical thing. So I said yes. They arrived with a moving truck on the first Saturday of August. Marcus Webb was 41 years old and had the handshake of a man who had practiced it. He smiled the way salespeople smile, wide and consistent and not quite reaching the eyes. He was efficient and energetic during the move-in, directing the hired movers with the authority of someone claiming conquered land rather than borrowing someone else's kindness. I watched him walk through my house the way a building inspector walks through a property assessing value, noting square footage, calculating potential. I told myself I was being uncharitable. The man had just moved his life from Nashville to help his aging father-in-law. I owed him grace. The first warning sign came that same evening. After the movers left, I went to the back porch to check the fuse box, a routine I had maintained for 15 years. The exterior code panel on the workshop had been reset. I had kept that code unchanged since Carol and I installed it. Now it rejected my numbers 3 times in a row before locking me out entirely. When I asked Marcus about it at dinner, He barely paused between bites. "Oh, I'm sorry, Robert. I should have mentioned that. The installer who helped us bring in my filing systems said the old panel had a compatibility issue with the new lock on the interior door. He reset it as part of the setup. I'll text you the new code after dinner." He did text me a code. It worked. But I lay awake that night thinking about the fact that a man who had been in my home for 8 hours had changed the access code to my workshop before he had even unpacked his own clothing. Over the following weeks, the adjustments came steadily, wrapped in the language of improvement. The living room furniture was rearranged because Marcus said the old layout blocked the natural light. My recliner, the one Carol and I had argued good-naturedly about for 12 years because she thought it was ugly, ended up in the corner farthest from the television. A new desk appeared in my workshop, surrounded by filing cabinets and a second monitor. My drafting table was pushed against the wall and covered with a drop cloth. When I uncovered it one afternoon to retrieve a set of old project drawings, the drawings were gone. Sandra said they had probably been accidentally packed into a storage box during the move. She would look for them. She never found them. Then came the conversation about the bedroom. Sandra knocked on my bedroom door one evening in September holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea, which was Carol's drink and not mine. She sat on the edge of the bed and told me she was worried about the stairs. She said she had noticed me gripping the railing more than I used to. She said the guest suite on the ground floor had its own bathroom and its own entrance to the side garden. She said it would be so much easier for me, so much safer, that she and Marcus would take the master bedroom simply because they were up and down the stairs constantly, and she couldn't bear to think of me falling. My knees were fine. I had walked 8 miles that week across uneven ground on the Eastern Trail without a single problem. But I looked at my daughter's face and saw something I recognized from when she was small and had already made up her mind about something. Arguing would produce no result, so I agreed, told myself it was temporary, and moved my things downstairs. Within 72 hours of moving into the guest suite, I heard Marcus on the phone late one evening, his voice carrying through the vent in the hallway. I caught fragments. He said something about the appraisal. He said something about the waterfront designation adding significant value. He said the timeline depended on the notary. I did not sleep that night. I was a structural engineer for nearly 4 decades. I solved problems by collecting data before drawing conclusions. Panic is a luxury a designer cannot afford. So the next morning I began to pay attention the way I had not allowed myself to before. I watched the mail. For 3 weeks, I watched Marcus intercept it. He was at the front door every morning before I came upstairs for coffee. When I began coming upstairs earlier, he started meeting the carrier at the bottom of the driveway. One afternoon, when he drove Sandra to a dentist appointment in town, I got to the mailbox first. Inside was a formal notice from the county property assessor's office, addressed to me, referencing a request for a property boundary survey filed under my name. I had filed no such request. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket. At dinner, I said nothing. The next day, while Marcus was locked in my workshop on a call and Sandra was in town, I drove to the county assessor's office and asked a clerk to pull every document filed under my name in the last 90 days. What she printed and handed me across the counter made the blood drain from my face. Someone had filed, under my signature, a formal request to reclassify the property from residential to mixed residential commercial use. That reclassification, if approved, would significantly alter the property's legal standing and open it to a category of sale or development financing not available under residential-only designation. The signature on the filing was mine. The handwriting was mine. I had never signed it. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of the assessor's office for a long time. Then I called Lawrence Briggs. Lawrence had been my personal attorney for 21 years. He had closed the property purchase, updated my will after Carol's death, and handled every legal matter I had trusted anyone with since 1998. I told him I needed to see him that afternoon. He heard something in my voice and told me to come right now. In Lawrence's office, I laid out everything: the intercepted mail, the boundary survey request, the forged signature, Marcus's phone call about the appraisal and the notary. Lawrence listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When I finished, he turned to his computer and was quiet for several minutes. Then he turned back to me. "Robert," he said, "there's a second filing, submitted 11 days ago. It's a petition to appoint Sandra as your legal conservator on the grounds of diminished capacity." I had to ask him to repeat it. A conservatorship petition. If granted, It would legally transfer control of my financial decisions, my property transactions, and my healthcare choices to Sandra. The petition cited 3 behavioral concerns: confusion with daily tasks, memory lapses, and an inability to manage complex financial matters independently. It cited, as supporting evidence, a signed letter from a licensed clinical psychologist in Nashville named Dr. Franklin Greer, confirming a preliminary assessment of early-stage cognitive decline. I had never met Dr. Franklin Greer. I had never spoken to him, visited his office, or submitted to any evaluation. Someone had either fabricated the assessment or provided him with enough fabricated information that he generated a report without ever meeting me. I gripped the armrests of Lawrence's chair. He put a hand on my arm and told me to breathe. Then, he told me the most important thing he had ever told me in 21 years of professional partnership. Don't go home and confront them. Don't let them know you've found this. The moment they know we're aware of the petition, Marcus will accelerate whatever he's planning. We need to move quietly, and we need to move faster than he does. I drove home. I sat at the guest suite's small table, drank black coffee, and applied the same logic I had used when I reviewed a structural failure report. You do not react to the visible crack. You find the source of the load that created it. 2 days later, Lawrence called with the name of a private investigator named Dean Carver, a retired FBI financial crimes analyst who now worked exclusively with attorneys on elder financial abuse cases. Lawrence had already briefed him. Dean met me at a diner 15 miles from the house. He was a quiet, methodical man who asked very precise questions and wrote everything in a small notebook with a mechanical pencil. When I finished, he told me to give him 5 days. In those 5 days, I continued my performance. I allowed myself to appear slightly more confused than usual. I asked Marcus the same question twice at breakfast on purpose. I left a burner on a low setting until Sandra noticed and turned it off. I watched Marcus's expression every time I did it. Satisfaction does not hide well on a man who is not expecting to be watched. On the 4th day, while Marcus drove to Nashville for what he described as a business meeting, I found what I had been looking for. Lawrence had obtained a court order to review any property transactions initiated under my name in the past 6 months. Among the documents was a listing agreement, signed in my name, with a commercial real estate brokerage in Chattanooga. The agreement authorized the exclusive right to market and sell my Lake Holston property for a minimum sale price of $1.8 million, with the commission structured to include a separate payment to an LLC registered to Marcus Webb's mother. He had not just planned to steal my equity through a bank, he had planned to sell the entire property outright, pocket the concealed commission through a family shell company, and use the conservatorship to ensure I had no legal standing to challenge the transaction. I was supposed to be declared incompetent before the sale closed. The money was supposed to flow out before I could find an attorney willing to take my case. But Marcus had forgotten something that every engineer knows. The structure you build reveals the load you planned for. And what his structure revealed was that he had never once accounted for the possibility that the man in the ground floor guest suite was not confused at all. Dean Carver delivered his full report on a Friday morning. Marcus's consulting firm had 3 clients in 4 years, all of whom had filed complaints with the Tennessee Real Estate Commission for misrepresentation. The firm carried no active licenses and had been operating in a legal gray zone that one more complaint would have collapsed entirely. Marcus owed $63,000 to 2 separate private creditors who had been calling his cell phone 3 times a day for 7 months. The Nashville office he described had been vacated 8 months ago. He had been working from my workshop, using my property's Lakeview address on his business correspondence from the day they arrived. The conservatorship petition, if granted, was his escape route. Sandra's signature gave him the legal mechanism. The property sale was the payday. And whatever share of that money he had promised Sandra, it was enough for her to look her father in the eye every Sunday morning and pretend she was there out of love. I sat with that truth for a full day before I could think clearly again. Then I called Lawrence and told him it was time to set the counter. Lawrence had already been in contact with the court overseeing the conservatorship petition. Because no hearing date had been set yet, we had a narrow window to respond before Marcus expected us to. Lawrence filed a formal objection to the petition, supported by a neuropsychological evaluation I had undergone voluntarily that same week, a comprehensive 4-hour assessment with a board-certified neurologist of Lawrence's choosing. The results were exactly what I knew they would be. Cognitively, I was in the 91st percentile for men my age. No deficits, no decline, no basis whatsoever for a conservatorship. At the same time, Lawrence filed a civil fraud complaint against Marcus Webb and the Chattanooga brokerage, citing the forged listing agreement. Dean Carver's financial investigation report was submitted as evidence to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and Lawrence executed the final piece, which I had authorized the week I first visited his office. 4 weeks earlier, following Carol's passing, I had quietly transferred the Lake Holston property into an irrevocable living trust. Lawrence had prepared the documents. I was the beneficiary. The trust was the legal owner. No power of attorney, no conservatorship, and no forged listing agreement could authorize the sale of an asset that I no longer technically owned as an individual. Marcus had spent 6 months carefully disassembling a structure he never actually had access to. It was Thanksgiving morning when it happened. Sandra had spent 2 days cooking, filling the house with the smells of roasting turkey and yeast rolls, and for a moment, walking through the kitchen, I almost forgot. Almost. But I knew what was scheduled. Lawrence had informed me that 2 men from the commercial brokerage were driving up from Chattanooga that afternoon for what Marcus had described to them as a final walkthrough of the property before the listing went live. He had told them the current owner had agreed to the sale terms. He planned to present himself as the authorized legal agent. I spent the morning of Thanksgiving in my workshop. I had a task to complete. The previous week, working from a detailed diagram Lawrence's office had sourced, I had installed 3 compact recording devices in the rooms of my own home. One in the living room, disguised inside the spine of an architectural reference book on the shelf. One in the kitchen, mounted behind the upper cabinet trim above the refrigerator. One in the workshop, inside the ventilation cover near the window. They were motion-activated, cloud uploading, and entirely legal under Tennessee's one-party consent recording statute. My own voice counted as one party. At 2 in the afternoon, I heard the crunch of gravel as a dark sedan pulled into the driveway. I watched from the workshop window as Marcus walked out to meet 2 men in business coats. He shook their hands with that practiced grip. He gestured toward the water, toward the tree line, toward the roof line. He was selling. He was confident and smooth and entirely unaware that every word leaving his mouth was being captured in high definition and uploaded to Lawrence's secure server. I gave it 45 minutes. Then I put on my good coat, walked through the side door, and came around the corner of the porch. Marcus saw me, and his face did something complicated and fast. He smiled immediately, but the smile arrived a half-second too late. "Robert, there you are. These are colleagues of mine, just stopping by briefly." He turned to the men and said, in a lower voice, "My father-in-law. He's been having some difficulty lately. Memory issues, we're managing it." I looked at the 2 men from Chattanooga, and I introduced myself by name and by professional title. I told them I was the owner of record for the property they were standing on. I told them no listing agreement bearing my name had been authorized by me, that any such document carried a forged signature, and that the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had received a formal complaint to that effect 48 hours ago. I told them that the property was held in an irrevocable trust and could not be sold by any agent, authorized or otherwise, without the full legal consent of the trustee. The 2 men looked at Marcus. They had the expressions of people who had just understood they were standing in the middle of someone else's catastrophe. Marcus started talking. He used words like misunderstanding and confusion and temporary cognitive state. He reached for the folder under his arm, pulled out the listing agreement, and held it up. I reached into my coat pocket and produced the full written response filed with the court that morning, along with the neuropsychological evaluation summary. I handed 1 copy to each of the men from Chattanooga and kept one for myself. Sandra had appeared in the doorway of the porch. She had a dish towel in her hand, and she was watching with an expression I recognized from her childhood, the expression she made when she knew she had been caught and was calculating whether denial was still an option. It was Lawrence who pulled into the driveway next, exactly on schedule. He had driven up from Knoxville with a colleague from the TBI field office who carried a badge and a warrant for the seizure of any forged documents on the premises. Marcus watched the second car door open and went very still in the way that men go still when they realize the structure around them has already collapsed, and what they are seeing is simply the dust beginning to settle. He did not go quietly, not at first. He raised his voice about due process. He threatened his own litigation. He demanded to call his attorney. The TBI agent let him call. Marcus stood on my driveway on Thanksgiving Day, next to the water Carol had loved, and made a phone call that no lawyer was going to answer on a holiday afternoon. Sandra came down from the porch. She stopped in front of me and her eyes filled up and she said she was sorry. She said Marcus had told her it was all legal. She said she hadn't understood what she was signing. She said she had trusted him. I did not respond the way she expected. I did not open my arms. I reached into my coat pocket and took out one more document. It was a photocopy of the conservatorship petition. I turned to the page that bore her signature, and I held it out to her without a word. She looked at her own handwriting for a long moment. The dish towel dropped out of her hand and landed in the gravel. "You signed a legal declaration," I said, and my voice was steady and quiet, the same voice I had used for 38 years when I told a contractor that a beam was not going to hold. "You declared, in writing, that your father lacked the mental capacity to manage his own affairs. You signed that document with a pen, in daylight, without anyone holding your hand. That was not confusion. That was a choice." She tried to speak. I raised one hand, not to silence her, but to finish my thought. "Your mother spent the last weeks of her life worrying about me. She made you promise to call every Sunday. She trusted you with me." I put the document back in my pocket. "You need to call your aunt tonight and arrange to stay with her. You have until morning to take what fits in your vehicle. The new key codes will be active by 9 a.m. Marcus was formally placed under arrest later that evening, when the warrant had been processed and the field agent's supervisor had reviewed the recording and documentation. The charges included fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and filing a fraudulent court petition. The conservatorship case was dismissed with prejudice the following Monday, at which point Lawrence submitted the neuropsychological evaluation to the court as a permanent record. The listing agreement was nullified. The LLC registered to Marcus's mother was referred to the state attorney general's office as a separate matter. Sandra was not arrested. That decision was mine to make, and I made it after 2 long conversations with Lawrence about what Carol would have wanted. But her cooperation with the investigation was required, and her name appeared on every document filed in connection with the case. What the courts did with that was no longer my business. The 2 men from Chattanooga sent a formal written apology through their brokerage's legal office. They had reviewed the listing agreement documents and determined that the signatures were inconsistent with standard notary procedures. They had retained their own counsel. I wished them well. On the first Sunday after Thanksgiving, I did not receive a phone call. I sat on the wraparound porch Carol had designed, with a cup of coffee and the morning paper, and I listened to the water. The workshop was mine again. I had uncovered my drafting table the evening before and found, behind the filing cabinets Marcus had pushed against the back wall, the cardboard tube containing my old project drawings. Carol's recipe paper was still in my desk drawer, exactly where I had left it. I am 67 years old, brothers and sisters. I spent my career making sure the things I built would hold the weight placed upon them. The lesson I learned the hard way is that the structures we build for the people we love require the same scrutiny we give to steel and concrete. Love is not a foundation. Love is what you build on top of one. Without the foundation of honesty and respect beneath it, love is just a beautiful thing waiting to fall. Guard your legacy. Know what you own and why you own it. Never let grief make you careless with the doors you open, because not everyone standing outside them is there to keep you warm. Some of them are simply waiting for you to stop paying attention. I stopped being careless, and everything they planned to take from me, every acre, every memory, every quiet morning on this water, I have it still. If this story stayed with you, please hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from today. I want to know. I will see you next time.